that would be good. I would like to welcome back those of you who have attended our meetings in the past, and a special welcome to newcomers. For those of you who are not experienced Zoom users, if you wish to see closed captions, there is a button to click on at the bottom of your screen. Tonight, captions will be provided by Denise Hinksman, who was substituting for Lauren Schechter, our regular captioner. I'm sure that anyone sent by Lauren will do a terrific job, so welcome, Denise. You can move the captions by putting your cursor on the caption box and moving it. If you keep the chat box open, you will avoid the orange chat icon popping up and covering the captions. If you prefer not to see the chat, you can drag and drop it to the side of your screen. Please also click on mute so that we don't hear background noises such as sirens and dogs barking in your house or apartment. As you've seen, we are recording this. When the recording is ready, we will post a YouTube link on our website for others who missed it tonight. Last year, for my 70th birthday, my family threw a big party for me. At that time, I asked guests in lieu of presents to contribute to the chapter of HLAA. Unbeknownst to me, after discussions with Catherine Boughton,
Come
my
here.
family arranged to use the money to sponsor one speaker per year as part of a series in my honor with a special focus on music and hearing. I am indeed honored and wish to thank those friends and relatives, some of whom may be watching with us tonight. Last year, we heard a wonderful presentation by violist Betty Houck, who is with us tonight. I am very excited about tonight's program. I have long admired the compositions of Gabriela Lena Frank when I've heard them performed by the American Composers Orchestra, where I was personnel manager for about 35 years. When I heard Gabriela speak on a Zoom program and when I read about her in the New York Times, I knew that she would be the ideal person to present the program this season. Gabriela is the Grammy Award-winning composer in residence with the Philadelphia Orchestra. Tonight, she will discuss her hearing loss, how it has affected her development and professional success as a composer. In addition, she will offer her thoughts about how the changes in Beethoven's compositions may have reflected the progression of his hearing loss. Born in Berkeley, California, to a mother of mixed Peruvian Chinese ancestry and a father of Lithuanian Jewish descent, Gabriela explores her multicultural heritage through her compositions. She was included in the Washington Post list of the 35 most significant women composers in history. In 2017, she founded the award-winning Gabriela Lena Frank Creative Academy of Music, a nonprofit training institution in Boonville, California, for emerging composers from a vast array of demographics and aesthetics. Civic outreach is an essential part of Gabriela's work. She has volunteered extensively in hospitals and prisons, with her current focus on developing the school program at Anderson Valley High School, a rural public school of modest means with a large Latino population. In 2020, the Heinz Family Foundation named Ms. Frank, who has a DMA, a recipient of the prestigious 25th Heinz Award in the Arts and Humanities category. And I'm delighted that she's here tonight to talk. I think we're in for a treat. So, Gabriela.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you so much for having me with you. First of all, I was having a little bit of trouble with my microphone. Can everybody hear me okay? If you want to just wave your hand, you're getting it just fine. Very good. I should say that 2 years ago, gosh, it's only been almost been 2 years since we've been in this pandemic. I did not even know what Zoom was. I had no idea that it was going to be such a significant part of my life. And over the last 2 years, and being invited to do talks on composing and music, I have to say that I've really loved this odd kind of intimacy, being able to see into everybody's home in everybody's living room. You're looking into my studio here, and I have found that I talk more honestly, more like myself than I do in post concert talks when I'm still in performance mode and I'm not dressed up. I'm wearing what I wear at home. And so I hope that in return that you will have lots of questions that we can really think of this as a conversation. So we'll leave time at the end, and I want to leave a generous amount of time because I've been informed that you all can be a chatty and you can be an inquisitive bunch. So I think let's take advantage of all of that. I thought what would be interesting would be to simply open up my life for you first and talk about my hearing loss from the very beginning and how my family adapted and how I grew up with it, how music came into my life, and how it's an ever present part of my life these days. And I'm even seeing hearing loss in my mother now, who was not born with it. She's about to get a cochlear implant in January on one side, and I've seen how much the technology has changed for surgical remedies as well as hearing aids, which I'm sure many of you are using right now. So I have a lot of feelings about all of it, as you can imagine. So I was born in Berkeley, California, as John mentioned, in 1972. And in the first few years of my life, my father, who just retired about 5, 6 years ago from UC Berkeley as a Mark Twain scholar and editor in the Bancroft Library after working there for almost 50 years. My father and my mother, a successful stained glass artist in the Bay Area art scene, noticed that unlike my older brother, I was sleeping through the night right away as a newborn. And there was something that was very different in my older brother, who would make a fuss over every little noise that he would hear. And so that was the first sign for them that something was different for me. And as the months went on and I turned 1 and I turned 2, then I turned 3 and I turned 4 and I wasn't speaking was the other big sign. And what made it all confusing was the fact that my brother was taking piano lessons at the time, and I just adored him. I had the little kid sister adoration of the big brother. He was 5 years older than me, so he seemed like a giant to me. And I would go to the piano while he was having his lessons and sit with my back against the instrument because we had a spinet. So there was a flat surface right against the wall that I could sit up against. And I would feel the piano during his lessons. And after his lessons would go and start playing his music. And so I didn't exhibit those signs of hearing loss that one might expect. But then I did in other ways. I wasn't speaking. When my name was called, I did not respond. I was a happy kid, and I seemed bright and intelligent. So when doctors speculated in my early life that I was mentally deficient, my father said, no, that's not right. My child is intelligent. Look how she can play in the playground, and she can figure things out. She looks like she's reading, because my father, of course, being a man of literature and a man of letters, would read to me constantly every day. But my father, who is a descendant from Lithuanian Jews, grew up in the Bronx. And I had family all through New York for many years. So that's a culture that I really know very well. And they lived up in New Rochelle for a while. He was a bodybuilder. Also, this little short Jewish man, 5'6", but he really stacked out with a lot of muscle and grew his brain. But when he read to me, his whole body and all that musculature would vibrate. So he was like a wonderful bass instrument or a harp. So unbeknownst to all of us, I was learning music and I was learning how to read because little kids' brains are in an amazing phase where they learn languages quickly and their brain is like a sponge, and we don't fully understand the capability. So instead of putting me in a special education class in 1977, and remember, as you can probably guess, it wasn't routine yet to test newborns on their hearing and their eyesight. That didn't come until much later. My father decided he was going to put me in a mainstream kindergarten class because he insisted that I didn't have special needs. So this was my first lucky break. I had very proactive parents. My second was my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Dukart, who only retired a few years ago in her mid 80s, who still remembers me, and she remembers me as her wonder child, her wonder student. She is an amateur cellist, and before she went in the 70s to teach in public schools, she worked with deaf kids, deaf children. And she saw in me all the signs of her former students. I still get goosebumps when I think about how lucky I was to find my first public school teacher, a musician who worked with hearing impaired children and who had a piano in her classroom. So I used to go and grab the other little kids and I would put them on a bench next to me. I would tell them what to play, and then I would improvise off of what they were doing. So I was social, but just social in my own way. And little kids are less judgmental. If you can play, you play. You just play in the dirt. You just did those things. So my kindergarten teacher expressed to my parents and said, I think your child is very bright. I think she has a significant hearing loss. She's musical. Why don't you go to the hospital and check her hearing? No doctor ever suggested this. It just didn't occur to them. In fact, they were saying things that were vaguely maybe racist. They were saying I was confused because there were multiple languages being spoken in my household, and they weren't taking me that seriously as a little young brown thing. Who knows? In retrospect, we can speculate all kinds of things. But so I got my hearing checked out, and I remember my first sensation with sound. I remember it very well. They put something in my ear, in both ears, and I remember it not fitting well, and it was just I didn't like that sensation at all. Now when I wear hearing aids, it's like I don't feel it. I'm so used to it. I sometimes forget that I have something in there. But it was extremely uncomfortable. And I was hooked up to some machine. That's all I remember. I can't tell you what it was, but I was wired up to a machine. And I remember my parents looking at me intently, and a couple of doctors, the audiologist was there, and they turned on the machine. And the first thing I heard was whoosh, just this kind of whoosh. Whoosh. It was like the air came to life. Like air has sound. It really does. There was something there. And then I heard something that almost sounded like my heartbeat. Like I could just hear the blood in I was just aware of my body. And then I heard my teacher was there. My kindergarten teacher wanted to come because I think she had done this before, and she knew what amazing moment it could be for the family. And she said, hello. And I remember that. It was a hello. And it was just so musical. The notes went up. I mean, it was a piece of music the way she did it. She kind of sang it. And I remember looking at her. And then I looked at my father on the other side. And it's the only time in my life that I've seen my father cry. It's the only time, that one time where he got visibly emotional that way. And years later, he would tell me that it's very hard as a parent to realize there's something off or disabled or, a challenge that you weren't expecting your child to have. Then they played some music, and they played the G major Bach cello suite, that first opening chord, the spooling out, and it became iconic. Those notes, that key, it introduced me to music. I remember the car ride home, and I was playing with the car seatbelt. I was going click, 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 in and out, and in and out, and in and out, because there was a sound to it. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. So I had to apply, like nail polish. I had to apply sound on everything that was already whole to me, if that makes sense. I already had the piano in my mind as a certain kind of experience, and suddenly there was this extra level, and then very quickly, in about 2-3 days, I started talking. I mean, little kids' brains are amazing. And so in my view, there is a very big difference between being born with a hearing loss and the challenges that you may have acquiring hearing loss, say suddenly through an accident or illness, and that might be very difficult. And then the slow degradation of hearing loss over time is its own challenge. My hearing loss has never changed over my life. They think there might have been one small dip when I was about 10, but fairly small. But it's also a flat loss across all the frequencies. And that points to a specific type of hearing loss, a neurosensory hearing loss. I'm sure all of you have seen those diagrams of the ear. So in the snail part of my ear, where all the little hairs are, the nerve hairs, they think I'm missing some of those nerves because everything else looks good. Everything vibrates the way it should. My canals are good, but they think I'm missing some of that, like you're missing a finger. And so and they don't know why. It's just, why is somebody born with 9 fingers instead of 10? So over the first few years of my life, I started piano lessons seriously, realizing that we do have a musical gene on the Frank Jewish side of the family. My grandmother, who lived in the Bronx and raised my father, was musical. She was a frustrated pianist. We have an early program of her playing in Carnegie when she was a young woman, but she couldn't pursue her dreams because of the Great Depression. And her brother had it. It skipped a generation. My father does not have the musical ability, nor does his brother, my uncle. My older brother doesn't have it, but when she saw it in me, we had a special relationship. And she didn't care if I had a hearing loss or not. And so I have perfect pitch. I improvise very well. I'm a facile pianist. I have a good memory. I have all the other things that help you in music. The way I like to say it, I'm just missing volume. I'm just missing volume. But I have everything else. And often volume is the entry, is the portal into music. And so it can be very difficult to imagine enjoying music when you don't have that doorway to get in. I didn't think I was going to study music. I learned how to become a very good lip reader. This is something that's common in people born with a hearing loss, is we learn how to become a very good lip reader. I don't lip read Spanish as well. English is my native language. But because I was put into speech therapy as a young kid, and I absorbed very quickly how people spoke. When I was younger, I was a very good mimic. I could sound like other people. And I lost that ability as, I guess, as I got older and my brain just focused on my own delivery of English. I do have an accent like my mom, and where I picked up her Peruvian Spanish accent, and it's hard for me to lose. And some people say I sound sometimes like I'm from the Bronx, especially when I get excited. And I sound like my father. It's just a certain rhythm comes out. And I think that's very common with people with hearing losses, is we really gravitate towards the first significant voices in our life. It's hard for us to get rid of that over time. So I was scholastically a high achiever. I would always sit in the front row so I could hear what was going on. Um, Most people did not know that I needed hearing aids. And I've heard my hearing loss, the level of loss that I have, quantified in a few different ways over my lifetime. So I'm 49 now. I've been a long time with hearing aids. Um, it kind of ranges between high moderate, sometimes it's qualified as high moderate, to low profound. There's sort of a gray area that people, audiologists and hearing doctors don't agree on. So it's not an insignificant loss, but it corrects pretty well with hearing aids. I can tell you that when I take off my hearing aids and I hold my ear very close, and now I have a beautiful Steinway Grand, of course, there's a really large one. Um, and I open the lid and I put my ears very close and I reach and I'm short, so I have to really reach to hit the keys and I try and hear what's coming out on my piano. It does sound different. It sounds less tinny. It sounds less of the consonants, the highs, and more of the body of the sound. And they often say low or depth. I've heard that described as imaging, the imaging of the sound, as if the sound is three dimensional. There's a body to it. And I think that's right. But I don't really know what normal hearing is. And my first hearing aids were not digital, they were analogs. And when you talk to audiophiles that collect LPs, and they will tell you that the sound of an LP is much better than a CD, much better than an MP3, all of these versions. I think the analog hearing aids are better than the digital ones that I have now, but they've been getting phased out. I was recently informed that there's still some companies that really try and do a good job with analogs, and I'm going to go investigate that. I started wearing digital about 2006 or so. I was really hanging on to analog hearing aids as long as I could. Over my experience, I feel that analogs have a purer delivery of the sound since it's mostly just about volume. And that digital add a lot of bells and whistles. They'll do things like, and I can see the value of it. They will push sound behind you farther away and bring in sound in front of you closer. But I'm a musician. I just want to know what the darn trombone is actually doing. I don't want a machine interpreting anything in there. I want as pure a sound as possible. So I've resisted a lot of the digitals, and I don't care if it's Bluetooth this and can like call up a pizza for me and deliver it. I mean, there's all these things that these hearing aids can do nowadays. I just want the beauty of the sound more than anything else. And because I'm a good lip reader, I do pretty well in crowded situations as long as they're light. If it's dark, forget it. I'm as lost as anybody else. Um, so scholastically, I was a high achiever. I was not planning on becoming a professional musician. I thought I was going to go into political science, and I had my eye. Who knows what I would have done, but I was thinking about law school when I was in high school. My brother got his doctorate from Stanford in neuroscience, so we were always achieving high. And then I took a music program right before I applied to college. And I fell hard. I fell hard for the music conservatory environment. I couldn't believe that I might be paid money to do this. And I just changed overnight and I went into this field. Generally speaking, over the years, I do fine in rehearsals. I can hear everything. Nobody looks at me weird when I say, I think the violin needs to be louder. I think you're out of tune. We're not quite together over here. I'm with it. I can hang, as we say. I can hang. Where I have trouble is if I'm writing a symphony for, say, Philadelphia Orchestra, and I'm in the audience during rehearsal, And Yannick, the conductor, turns around and says, Gabby, do you like it this way or that way? I cannot hear the voice. That is an issue. The music is fine, but there's something about the voice that I'm not getting. And you're making me think. Growing up, when my father realized that I had hearing aids and I was going to access the world, we stopped going to the normal movie theaters. We only went to see foreign films because they were captioned. So I grew up with a pretty sophisticated knowledge of foreign films from and he was a Peace Corps volunteer. I mean, so he was open to other cultures in the world, but I've seen them all, if they're like French or Vietnamese. But the American films, like the big Hollywood hits, I didn't catch those until much later, DVDs and online now that we can avail ourselves of closed captioning. So I was a bit of an unusual child in that way. So for these rehearsals in the symphony setting, I know now, just like I used to say I need to sit in the front row in classrooms, I know to tell the orchestra, give me your assistant conductor, put him next to me. I need a light. And so I will tell the conductor that when he's calling across and needs my input, because this is a high pressure environment, you want to take about 2 seconds to speak to the conductor and not waste rehearsal time. If they want to know faster, louder, you say yes or no. You don't say, what did you say? What rehearsal number? You have to know right away. I'll ask the assistant conductor and say, your job is to let me lip read you. Don't whisper it in my ear. It's the worst thing to do because I can't see your lips, is to lean back. Sometimes they lean forward and I start leaning back and it's this weird dance that happens. I'll say, just repeat what they said in a normal voice. Don't like exaggerate. When people exaggerate and they're not speaking comfortably and normally, I can't lip read that so well. I sometimes have to train the assistant conductor a little bit in what I need. Then I can, between this triangle of the conductor and the assistant conductor and me, then I can participate. And that's one example of all these little tricks, all these things that I ask for, and to do it without embarrassment. Sometimes you do it with humor, sometimes a little bit of charisma or charm goes a long way. I'm in a high pressure field, especially as a disabled woman of color. There are a lot of different challenges that have all gotten conflated into one. Last year, some of you might have seen a New York Times opinion piece that I was invited to contribute, and I'll put that in the chat if you haven't. And you can read it later. So this happened in late December of last year, almost a year ago. A little before this, one of the reporters in the arts section had written an article about me, about my work, and it was she did a wonderful, wonderful job. And I really enjoyed talking with her. And on the phone, which is always a little nerve-wracking when I have to get on the phone with somebody I don't know, she had a very clear voice. So I felt like I knew her forever. Wow, you're my best friend. I can understand everything you're saying. So we had a really nice conversation. She let me know that she was very interested in writing about hearing loss in musicians. And I said, wow, I would love for you to do that. I have had maybe, I'm not exaggerating, I would say at least 50 musicians over my life, particularly during the last 20 years, have come to me very quietly asking my advice about how to address their hearing loss. They didn't want it known that they were experiencing hearing loss in their field. They were scared and they were asking for advice. And of course, I, would tell them what I could about how to get around hearing loss. A few of them, I went to the doctor with them and helped them get fitted for hearing aids, which can be a a very strange experience and uncomfortable, even depressing experience and frustrating. So the reporter, when she said that she was interested in writing this article about hearing loss in musicians, I said, you have to do this. It's something that's like a secret shame for a lot of us. And multiple studies exist showing how common hearing loss is in the United States across many ages. We need to take the shame and the stigma. I mean, we don't have that much shame and stigma with wearing glasses. I don't get it. It's we need to do this. This is important. So she and I began emailing about it. And she asked me, and she said, so what's your view about Beethoven? And while I was standing at my kitchen counter one morning, I was standing and I wrote this long email. She showed that email about my views about hearing loss and Beethoven and music, and to her editor, Zachary Wolf. He sent me an email the next day and said, we want to give you a byline. We're going to put this in the New York Times section tomorrow. And I said, what? Wait, let me go back and make sure I didn't say anything too personal. Was my grammar good? My Mark Twain father would just die if I don't have good grammar that's going in the New York Times. Let me take a look at this email. And it was pretty good. I cleaned up, a couple of misspellings, and that's an email, this link. And it became this opinion piece just straight from the heart about my own personal feelings. So one of the things that I think about Beethoven, who of course is iconic and changed classical music. I mean, enough words cannot be said about the giant that he was. I never saw him as a giant. I saw him as an accidental giant. He was writing the music that he needed to write as a man really struggling with hearing loss. Maybe a struggle that's familiar to you and to me. And knowing how my hearing affects the kind of music that I like to play. I love physical music. I like music that I'm just dancing around the keyboard because it's a dance. It reminds me of the kind of music that made sense to me when I was a little girl in silence. I know that dissonant music, I can feel it more than consonant music. When my hands are farther apart, it's very clear what's going on. I'm in the low range of the piano and the high range of the piano. All of these things, these specific traits, I was seeing more and more the later in Beethoven's output we go. In the earlier pieces, he sounds kind of like a late Mozart. But the farther we go in his lifetime, you start seeing all of these things that show up in his piano sonatas that a deaf person could perceive more easily. We know that his hearing disappeared from the middle range out. So he was chasing the notes as they were running away from him, going higher and higher and lower and lower. And in general, it's not a straight line, but if you look at his many sonatas, several dozen sonatas for piano, the hands are getting farther and farther and farther apart. And this is very unusual. This was not seen in other keyboard composers at the time. To me, it's very obvious what's going on, but it's not something that a hearing person would necessarily identify. In fact, the way that we normally talk about Beethoven's hearing loss is in a more metaphorical sense. He was struggling, so he wrote struggle music, big music, bombastic music. But I actually think there's a more intimate connection that is happening. And so this article talks about that. And I speculate in the article what kind of hearing aid that I think Beethoven might have liked. And I just shared with you a little bit of my antipathy towards digital hearing aids and my love of analog. I think he would have hated the digital hearing aids and would have loved the analog hearing aids. I think he would have loved the modern piano. His piano wasn't quite what we have now, although he helped push along the growth of the modern piano. I think he would have loved this. I think he would want extra notes, like extra low notes, and maybe a longer body with longer strings. I mean, obviously, maybe 4 or 5 pedals doing different things. That was what his body, his ears were crying out for. And in this opinion piece, I also talk about deliberately turning off my hearing aids, and being in silence for a few days at a time. Now, I live in the woods now. I can do that. And I have a very understanding husband, and I can lip read my husband. So it's just the two of us. So I'm not causing any consternation in the household when I say I'm going to be in silence for the next few days. I can speak. I may speak a little louder than I need to because I can't moderate my voice so well anymore. But something happens to my imagination when I'm in silence. It's a little bit like going in a dream. You recognize the dream world. It's a different world. You may be in your house, but impossible things happen. And they don't throw you. They just don't. It's your own fantastical world. That's a great world to be in if you're an artist. You're supposed to come up with new and revelatory things in your work. And so I really protect that space. I like to compose in silence. I don't compose at the piano. When I'm writing piano music, symphony music, choral music, there are times when it's good for me then to go into reality. But I learned how to ping pong between being deaf, between being hearing, something in between. And I learned that on my own. I think I did it when I was a little kid too, but I learned to harness it in a very proactive way. And so when this New York Times opinion piece came out, and I put it up on Facebook, and I got such a strong response from my friends. There were some friends that said, "I didn't know you were hearing impaired. I didn't know you had a hearing loss. What?" Others, like my old college roommates, that remembered that in the morning I might not be able to see them, but they're the ones that got very comfortable with my lip reading, and because I live with them. And my very best friend used to come up and stick her finger in my ear. "Do you have your hearing aids on?" Just to see if I had my hearing aids on. I mean, we were all very funny and about it. She said, "I would have known that was you from the very first sentence. The way you always talked about your hearing loss and how it was such a natural, special part of you. I could see that." Other musicians were saying, "You know what? I did notice that." I had a pianist who said she plays with the Baltimore Symphony. And so she's a very high level pianist. She said, "You know those first 10 minutes on the stage when there's a lot of noise, everybody's just playing the hard licks in the piece, people are tuning their instruments, and it's totally chaotic on the orchestra stage, you know." And she said, "That's when I'll play the piano and warm up and add to the noise. I'm adding to the noise of everybody." But she says, "I'm totally relaxed because I can't hear myself. So I'm just focusing only on the feel." And I talk about that in the article, just the physical sense without the sound. And then as people quiet down and I hear a little bit of myself and I don't like the sound, I stiffen up. I get tense. I do something physically that's not healthy. And she said, what you talk about in the article about practicing the piano in silence so you can just focus on the physical and not worry about the sound. You can focus on what feels physically healthy so you don't get injured as a musician. I realize now that I do have those moments. I just never harnessed it. So now she's been experimenting with putting earplugs in and just working on the physical choreography. So my hearing loss hasn't been a loss necessarily, as you can see. It's really formed my personality. It's helped me be unusual in my perspective and work. Um, I feel like people that have a handicap, if they've been allowed to explore other possibilities, other vistas and perspectives that are different because their body is different, if they have been allowed to do that the way I was, have something unusual to contribute that we can all benefit from. And I guess that email to the reporter that really just came from my heart was positive in that way. When I was in my late 20s, I did have a difficult physical experience that gave me a whole new perspective on my hearing loss. I was diagnosed with Graves' disease, completely unrelated to my hearing loss. It's an autoimmune disorder that, and usually in women, I was a bit young to get it. It usually gets middle-aged women. But it's your immune system starts attacking your thyroid. And a part two of this, it can attack your eyes. Now that's terrible for a person with hearing loss. And I lost vision, even with I did radiation at a cancer center for a while and did almost 9 surgeries, a lot of drugs. But I lost most of the eyesight in my left eye. And when things were really bad and I was really in danger of going blind, I got very scared. I didn't have such a positive attitude. It made me humble for people that lost their hearing later in their lives, or when their body breaks down after you've identified so much with a certain physical way of being. I couldn't lip read as well. My champion lip reading skills went out the window. And, vision came back and I learned how to adapt. But it gave me this new sense of what it means to work with what you have, to ask for what you need, to and then to try and find what it gives you. And that was a challenge with all of that. But it's been almost 20 years since I had that disease. And I've been living with vision loss too for the last 2 decades, and it has become part of who I am as well. I have an amazing life. I really do. I have an amazing, amazing life. So in the end, it has become a part of who I am. It's neither necessarily negative or positive. It is what it is. Just like every other aspect of me. And I think it's wonderful that you have this group so that you don't have isolation. Isolation can make things very difficult. And you feel that your experiences are, you're not being ridiculous to have the feelings and the physical experiences that you do. So I think I've hit my 45-minute mark, almost right on the dot. And I think we should open this up for any questions or just reactions or thoughts. I really love the
I'm
exchange
gonna,
when I get to do things like this.
Gabriela, that was wonderful. It was just a wonderful presentation. I will just explain that if you want to ask a question, please click on the reactions tab at the bottom of your screen, then click on raise hand. David Landsberger will unmute you and you will be able to speak. In order to give as many people as possible a chance, we do request that you keep your question to 1 minute. When you reach a minute, you will be cut off. If you need to ask a follow-up question, you will be given an extra minute. I'm going to take the prerogative of asking a couple of questions first, though. When Betty Howe spoke last December, she said she had been advised to start listening to smaller ensembles when she had her hearing loss. And although as a former trombone player, I love hearing big orchestras, I do find it easier to listen to a string quartet. I know that when you spoke on the American Composers Orchestra Zoom, you said you had initially been scared to write for a large orchestra. Was that because of your hearing loss? Or, you're now at the Philadelphia Orchestra, which is a large orchestra.
I think, to be honest, the less about the loss and more that I was comfortable writing for my native instrument, the piano and strings, because I played so much chamber music, so I had a lot of string friends. And the trombone scared me. And to this day, the section of the orchestra that I feel the least, although I feel pretty comfortable with every section now, um, the brasses were the last family of instruments for me to get comfortable with. And just any composer might say that because you have to first write some bad music for trombone and have a trombonist say, "This doesn't work, let me show you," or "Let me show you this great Strauss excerpt that is so well written for my instrument." And I didn't begin that kind of study. So I think it was less about the hearing loss and just the daunting spectacle of learning how to speak fluently in flute and clarinet and bassoon. And it's just endless what composers need to learn. It's a lot.
Well, having heard your compositions, I think you really have learned how to, write for brass and woodwinds. I just have one other quick question, which is a hearing aid question. Do you have another program on your hearing aids for music?
I do. My audiologist initially was very resistant. Had a was gonna Didn't realize how sophisticated my hearing is, and we musicians can be a pain in the butt. We can really be a pain in the butt for audiologists. Um, I remember the audiologist, for instance, when I first met him, and he came very highly recommended by some friends of the family. So I knew he was a good person. He played a Haydn string quartet, and the highs were so exaggerated because that's often what late deafened adults like is the highs because they're losing speech and they can't talk with their family and friends. Whereas musicians with hearing loss, we want the beauty of the sound. We don't want it just to be functional. We want to hear the balance between the bass, the middle, and the tenor. So I could not hear the cello line whatsoever. I said, "Oh my God, what a Frankenstein." And he said, "What you've created here, this is not how Haydn meant it to be. Where's the cello line?" And I sang it back to him. He was shocked and said, "Okay, let me fix this." And then he got the balance right between all the levels and whatnot. So, as far as hearing aids, yeah, I think you need to dialogue, with your hearing aid practitioner and to get it right. And I constantly have this kind of conversation. Um, each hearing aid's a little different. And no matter how much I converse and get the music setting to where I think is appropriate, um, every hearing aid, it's kind of like driving a different car. You can still make a left turn, but the physicality is a little different. The feel of the car is a little different. And a hearing aid is very nuanced. It can seem very different. It's a great question.
Thank you. And before I turn it over to others, I want to comment. You said a couple of things I think that are very important. You said that you need to ask for what you need. That's important to ask for what you need, and that's a very fundamental principle of the Hearing Loss Association, to be assertive about that, and in particular in the setting of with your audiologist. And I say this with my longtime audiologist here in the audience, that I can be a pain in the butt. I ask for things, and it's important to ask for what you need. It's also important when you're dealing with your audiologist to think about what it is that the problems are. Uh, I know that my father late in life, I would take him to the audiologist and say, "I don't like it." "Well, what don't you like?" "I don't like the sound." Well, that doesn't help the audiologist in any way. And that because you're a musician and I've been a musician, maybe I'm more used to thinking in these terms, but it's important to convey to the audiologist what it is you need. And I've been fortunate to have wonderful audiologists who have been very helpful. So I'm going to end my monopoly here. And I see that Ruth Bernstein has her hand raised. So I don't know, David, do you want me to, or Ruth, do you unmute yourself?
I cannot unmute. I can only mute. That's a privacy issue. So Ruth, please unmute.
Hi, Gabriela. I want to. Okay. I am muted.
No, we're hearing you.
Gabriela, have you spoken to your audiologist about getting an assistive listening system that would allow you to hear the conductor when you're at a rehearsal?
I haven't, and I have found that if I can get a living person, it's a little bit, if I can get a living person to do it, that they get more invested personally. They get more invested. Musicians, we're a social bunch. If you can draw us together to participate in a team effort to make the show successful, that speaks to the language of musicians, especially acoustic musicians that don't, we play on wood and string and ebony, and we use our breath. At heart, it's not about technology. And so if I can stay in that lane, if you see what I mean, and just, it's a language that speaks more easily. Now, after Zoom and after the pandemic, the classical music world has shifted. And it may be, they may be thrown into less of a tizzy if I say, let's try some devices. And so when my concert life resumes more fully, I actually have a premiere with Chicago Symphony and Philadelphia Orchestra this month, and I'm missing both of them. I just can't get out there right now. And because of COVID, the scheduling didn't work. But the next time I have an environment like that, I should push the envelope a little bit and see what they can do.
It's worth a try.
It's worth a try. Why not?
Catherine, you can unmute.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. That was just an amazing talk. It was really, really wonderful. John sort of asked my question, but I'm going to ask it in a slightly different way. I'm really interested in your feeling about analog hearing aids and digital hearing aids. And I wonder, have you ever thought about wearing the analog hearing aids for music and then having a separate pair of hearing aids that you would wear during, conversations with people and watching television if you do that?
I need to
where
do
you
it.
need a more different kind of hearing.
I need to do it. I have, and then I was like, I don't want to spend the money. I'm cheap, or come up with something. But I think I will like to try that. And in fact, I was a test subject for an exciting new hearing aid by the company Meyer Sound. Meyer Sound is a company based in Berkeley, California, started by these hippies in the 60s that made a lot of money learning how to amplify the Grateful Dead of all projects. And they are a speaker technology company. The speakers are incredible. And you can go on their website. With John Meyer, the patriarch, the genius behind the whole thing, we met at a concert. Lovely guy with a beard down to his waist. He really does look like an old Berkeley hippie. It's just so funny, very down to earth. He said that he was getting interested in hearing aids. He wanted to see if the speaker technology that they developed and had the rights to could be miniaturized. How miniaturized could they get it? And so I had been a test subject for their hearing aids for a number of years, and they wanted to really have a pure analog sentiment. And then they started to narrow their audience. They started to focus on musicians with hearing loss. So I have my eye on that. Right now, where I think they are is that the hearing aid would be attached to a device about the size of an iPhone. So there would be a wire coming through. And so there's some issues with that. Some people may be embarrassed. I'm not, but some people may be understandably, embarrassed, or it could get in the way of a violinist if there's a wire coming out of the ear. So I'm very interested in exploring what technology is available, and if it means two different sets of hearing aids, why not? Yeah, great idea.
Thank you. David?
Hi. First of all, that was a fabulous talk. I loved it. It was wonderful to hear from you. And I, I've amused. I want to ask another question in the same direction about digital versus analog, or so in my thought process, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I predict what you like about analog versus digital isn't analog versus digital, but it's the horrible digital signal processing in the digital hearing aids that are designed to optimize for speech. If that's true, then would you do really well if you, instead of using a hearing aid, you just used a good quality pair of headphones and a nice amplifier?
I've tried the best headphones out there, and in fact, I even tried Meyer headphones,
Right.
and it got to the point where it was endangering my eardrum. Um, that there is damage that can happen from loudness, and so it was also physically uncomfortable. They had these headphones that were analog that they wanted me to try, and it kept pumping up the volume, and it actually got physically uncomfortable, and I couldn't hear anything yet. So the level that they were pumping it up, the physicality was becoming painful, and sound hadn't yet become apparent, if that
Hmm.
makes any sense. So my hearing loss is advanced to that degree.
Well, there should
So
be, well, that pair of headphones clearly doesn't work for you, but there should be a pair of headphones that does, simply because all a hearing aid is a speaker in the ear. And so if the hearing aid you can hear reasonably, then there should be a speaker that you can put in the ear that works. What I would
I
love
would
to do
love to
is,
try it.
what I would
I
love
would
to do
be,
is
yeah.
not change the speaker so much, but get rid of the hearing aid part and just use like a professional in-ear monitor with an amplifier. And then you have musician quality reproduction with your own equalizer to set to whatever curve you want to emphasize whatever instruments you want, and no horrible digital signal processing.
I am writing this down, my friend, to ask Meyer Sound what they were doing on me,
I would,
saying, is this something they can do? Because if it's that simple,
it's it's not elegant in that it's, large relatively. I will also take a look at Meyer's Sound. I don't know about them, but I'm absolutely intrigued by your story.
yeah, check them out. There's a good from a couple years ago, New Yorker magazine has a really nice article about them, and there's they keep a low profile actually for a few different reasons, but I am going to send an email to see about this. You giving me an idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I truly loved the talk.
Harold Turk.
I just have to say that your story is just unbelievably and so well spoken.
Harold, we're losing you.
Oop, I think we lost you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, he seems to have disappeared. Maybe he
Okay.
will come back. Let's go to Win Wyman.
Okay,
Oh,
can't
there he
believe
is.
your story. But I have a technical question. Do you know your decibel loss across your hearing audiogram? Is it like 50 dB or 20 dB?
I have to go look it up. I should have looked it up before this. I used to know it.
Would you say it's in the middle of the graphs on the side? Or is
I
it
can
towards
see
the
it. I
top?
think it's fairly high, maybe 3/4 up.
Okay, that just give me an idea.
Yeah.
But I just appreciate your story and learning about music so much. I don't know music. I didn't hear it until 10 years ago. So I'm 75. That's a lot of years I didn't hear music. But once again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
When?
Yeah, hi, I have more of a musical question. So, had a progressive hearing loss since I was a preschooler. When I was in college, for general ed, I took Music Theory 101 just because I enjoyed music, played the piano, but I had very little music theory training. And so when I got in there, I did the written tests and I aced them, no problem about, minor thirds and building things and all of that. But then when it came to any of the auditory tests, where like play a melody and then you have to write it down on a score of music or say, is this a minor third or that kind of a thing, I flunked. And so I've always wondered if that is part due to the hearing loss and to the harmonics and the resonance that I can't hear that higher pitch or not. And so if you have any comments just from your own experience, like, when you hear a piano being tuned, do you think you hear what the piano tuner is hearing, to be able to make sense in your brain with that music?
That's a really that's very interesting. My brain's kind of exploding with a few different possibilities. So first, let me just say that what you're speaking of, music theory, and then the corollary, what we call ear training. So music theory is being able to understand, count the half steps, spell out the notes correctly according to a scale system, and the chords and the harmonies. And then what does that sound like would be the ear training, is the auditory half of it. When they teach that in the conservatory, they teach it in two separate classes, like the music theory class and the ear training class. It was not uncommon for hearing people to do well in one and terrible in the other. And sometimes it was flip. Like they could hear everything really well, but they didn't know what it was. But they couldn't tell you the nomenclature, or they didn't understand the relationships around the circle of fifths or whatever. Then you saw those that may have been stronger in one and the other over time, over diligent practice, trained their ear, trained their mind, and they could bring up the weaker half. So that's a pretty common journey with evolving musicians. And I was very much in the opposite camp to you, where I could hear, because I had perfect pitch, so I could hear what, if it was a minor third or a major third. I had a very good memory, so I could mostly write down on first hearing what the melody was. When it was super atonal, it would get a little more challenging, but I just got better. But then I had to really hustle and really study almost with flashcards, like the multiplication table, trying to understand and flip around the harmonies and the names and everything else. Whether that's a tie to your particular hearing loss, I wouldn't know, but I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a complicated mix of both the normal kind of training that one goes through to bring up the two halves, and some sort of complicated relationship with your progressive hearing loss, which is a moving target. And so that's my view on it. Now, the kind of perfect pitch I have is an unusual one, in that most of the people I've ever met with perfect pitch, for those of you that may not know, this means that if you play a note on the piano, and if I'm not looking, I can tell you what it is. And I can tell you it's A flat. And that would be like, for me, those people that don't have perfect pitch is like you seeing the world in black and white. And that if you see red, it wouldn't come up as red. That's what it's like for me. But you can still watch a movie and really enjoy it and you forget that it's in black and white. It's not going to really harm you. So not having perfect pitches for me is like people are seeing in black and white and can still love music. But when I hear A flat, my A flat is a very general, let's say A, the classic A that an orchestra tunes to, or a string quartet. My A is a very generous A. And I remember even in ear training class, teacher once saying that it was like my personality, very generous personality. I had a very generous A. My A could be a little bit sharp, a little bit flat, not sharp or flat enough to be a bona fide A sharp or A flat, like somewhere in between. And I would be okay with it. I would just maybe not even notice that I was a little bit sharp. But as soon as it became A sharp or A flat, then I'm like, hey, that's not A anymore. So now you've gone too far. There were like a boundary. So I didn't have that ability. I played violin for a very short amount of time and I was terrible at violin. In part because I wouldn't tune my A. My A was like all over. As long as it was still in the A universe, I was fine with it. Most of the people that I know with perfect pitch need a razor sharp center A. Otherwise, they're like in agony. And I don't have that. So, it's fascinating. This whole thing of sound that we don't talk about enough. It's really fascinating how people take it in. So thank you for sharing your story. And I think with your case, it's probably a complicated mix of a few different things going on there.
Yeah, thanks. I've never heard about the two halves. And so that's a gem that's kind of a takeaway.
Kind of
to mix in.
Gives you a paradigm or a model, to understand what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Diane Sussman? Diane Sussman, did you have your hand raised? You can unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Diane. You're muted. Okay, Diane, can you unmute?
My
Okay,
hand
now go ahead.
wasn't raised.
We can hear you. Hi,
Your hand went-
Diane.
Okay, on the screen, it's showing a raised hand for you. Okay. Are there other questions or comments that people have?
Okay.
I'm not seeing, oh, Holly. Oh, that actually, it looks like Tony. Unmute.
It is. I couldn't find the link. I'm using Holly's link. Gabriela, thank you so much. You have such a beautiful perspective, and I especially loved what you said about how you use the quality of your hearing loss. Have you used it to find a different path for yourself? And it would be great if people with hearing loss could have somebody to help them find those different paths, and they should try to do it. I have a question that's going to take you in a whole other place. It's just an issue, an area that I'm really interested in personally. And in your bio, it mentioned that you had done some work in prisons. Could you just talk to that for a little bit about where you did that and what you did and what you took away from that experience?
So I've done a number of one-offs all over, and sometimes in my capacity as a guest composer with an orchestra, and they would have an ongoing program that they just dropped guest artists into, and you would just speak one time. The longest relationship, like ongoing relationship, that really changed me and really affected me, and it's why it's in my bio, because it had that formative effect on me, was when I was in grad school at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor when I did my doctorate. In Adrian, Michigan, there's a facility that's still there called the Gus Harrison Correctional Facility. And I became a volunteer because by this time I was starting to travel frequently in Latin America. And I was getting to know my mother's family in Peru, and it was really affecting, having a powerful impact on the stories that I wanted to tell, to incorporate Latin American idioms into my own music. And it reflected the music that I heard growing up anyway. Peruvian folkloric music was a big part of my life in Berkeley. And this was an appeal that was made on a Latin American e-group for people interested in topics around South America in particular. a grad student in anthropology who was a volunteer at this prison, saying, I am looking for guest speakers on any topic to come and work with Latino inmates. These are men of Latin American ancestry. They have formed a group called ASTA, an acronym for HASTA, for Hispanic Americans Striving Towards Achievement. And there was an ASTA 1, ASTA 2, ASTA 3, ASTA 4. ASTA also means like forward or into. It can mean, moving forward anyway. So they were looking for guest speakers. And so I said, I'll do it. And I was really naive. I'd never done anything like this before. And I went in, and it was a very moving experience for me to do it that one time. And then I just kept going back, and there was a kind of a core group. So I was a young Latina woman in my mid to late 20s that was spending her Saturdays to drive, to this really not a beautiful city, this little city like a lot of prison towns. It was, although they call it a correctional facility, like a holding pen, it was in effect a long-term prison. They had lifers there, and so I would speak to them. And because I was traveling Latin America, I was telling them about things that I saw there that I could tell was really resonating with them. So many of them didn't speak Spanish, were very cut off from their ancestry. There's just an automatic pride that you feel when you feel like you're a part of a continuum, a historical continuum, that you didn't just spontaneously come into the world, that you come from a proud people. And I wasn't that articulate about what I was doing the way I am now. It was more of an instinct that I needed to do this. And I remember bringing in some articles from the New York Times that tangentially had something to do with what I was going to talk about. And these topics would get very deep, but it gave me this real important perspective on, why am I doing this? Shouldn't I just go to law school? If I really want to have an impact, why am I choosing music? And it gave me an important awareness. I have a wonderful career. I'm very blessed, especially as a woman of color, a disabled woman of color. But I was always a little skeptical that just giving concerts wasn't going to do anything for people that can afford the tickets. I wanted to do that and everything else. And so it got started. I mean, I wouldn't be here except for a civic initiative of my father, who joined the Peace Corps because he wanted to do something as a liberal New York Jewish man whose family suffered in the Holocaust. And so that helped me trigger it. I had this body of real people that made terrible choices, that were just drinking in our words as guest speakers with news of the world. That's what it felt like. So I keep that in my bio because that really tells you something about who I am as a personality, as a storyteller.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands up, so I'm going to use my privilege again and ask another question before we close out. Your bio talks about your working in the Anderson Valley High School to develop the music program, and I'm curious, what form does that take? What is that? Playing instruments? Is it music appreciation, or all of the
Really
above?
excellent question. So about 6 years ago, my husband and I left the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, and we moved north about 2 hours into Mendocino County. I don't know how familiar Northern California is to some of you. And I live in a tiny little town that I'd never heard of. I was a typical Bay Area person that only went out to drink wine in the vineyards, not really understanding this wonderful, large history that we have in this very large state of California. Boonville, California. And I remember thinking, God, I got the boondocks and I got the Ville. I mean, Boonville, where is this? And it turns out that my husband has roots here. He comes from a logging family. He grew up in Napa, and his grandfather used to live here. So he would come to the Anderson Valley in Mendocino County. The vineyards that we have here are rugged vineyards. They struggle a little more. So it tends to be very bold red wines and a lot of redwoods. I'm in a fire zone, and we have spent the last 4 years really hardening our property. We have about 20 acres of land. And Boonville is about 1,000 people. It is tiny. It is a tiny little town. Very good community here. A lot of Latinos that work in the farms and the vineyards. So the public high school, the Anderson Valley High School, used to have a band years ago. They still have old trombones there, John. They still have old trombones and old uniforms. They have a dedicated small music classroom. You have to understand, this is very unusual for a small rural area. And they had a volunteer who, until a few years before I got here, was teaching music as much as he could. This old descendant of a logging family. And he credited the kids with helping him live a long life, that this was his reason for living. And he was teaching them flute, and they played simple tunes as a band. So the principal of this high school, a local boy that was the math teacher that became the principal, he is about a year older, a year younger than me. So basically a contemporary. He went to UC San Diego and studied music there before he got sensible and studied math instead. And so when I showed up, he said, help me resurrect something here. And I said, oh my God, yes, I will, of course. So I started volunteering there, and he managed to get money from the county to buy a bunch of shiny new computers. But we don't have the teachers. I mean, this guy that was teaching before was one of these remarkable musicians that could play a little bit of trombone, clarinet, flute. I mean, you see this a lot in the band world. You got a guy who can, or somebody that can play a lot of different instruments decently. So we focus on composing at the computer. I'm constantly fundraising for my academy, for all the different things that we do. And I managed to find a donor, somebody who's giving us $75,000 a year for me to bring in Bay Area musicians that will play the compositions of the students here. And we have a second house that we bought and fixed up, and that's where I'm speaking to you from, that alums of my academy, these are composers in their 20s and 30s that are going on to a symphonic career. We can house them to live here for 4 months at a time, and they will go in every day and teach these kids. We're going to flood them with so many teachers and so much music. Because we did this as a one-off a few years ago. I had a string quartet. I paid for it and just had them come in frequently, and I taught the kids. And this valley is still talking about that concert from April of 2018, when we heard 17 world premieres in one evening, all string quartets, each one about 90 seconds long, by these boys that pick grapes and apples. 15, 16-year-old boys. That's a hard group to reach. I'm not cool anymore. I used to be cool when I was in my 20s, but I'm not anymore. But they were learning about pizzicato and, arco and whole notes. And we used a computer. We used my friends in a string quartet. And so January will begin this new program. And with my composers living here and teaching them. And I picked two really good composers that are super cool. One is a guitarist that lives in Brooklyn, a jazz Brooklyn guitarist that can improvise. He's in Spain right now learning flamenco. He'll teach him guitar. There's a bunch of guitars. The others is more classical, really wonderful pianist. I'll be there. My staff will be there. And then these Bay Area musicians will come in once a month. So it's an experiment. And this donor grew up in a small rural town. So he understood the spirit, trying to do this. When we did it back in April with the 17 world premieres, 3 of those kids, because of that one experience, they went on to college to study music. And they're becoming music teachers. And so, with very little, when we go into these, it's like when I go into Peru, I go into these small rural towns like this, we forget. San Francisco, New York, Chicago, where most of my life is professionally, we forget how just a small fraction of that can do so much for a young person. And one of them is getting his teaching credentials now, and wants to become the next principal of the high school, and he'll be the first Latino to do so. And the principal and I are encouraging him. You know, we've really pushed that. So it rejuvenates me to have those kinds of things in my life, and that's what I fundraise for, are programs like that. And I mean, boy, we need this kind of thing now more than ever with how divisive
that's
things have gotten.
Thank you, Gabriela. That's really terrific. I don't know if you're looking in the chat box at all, but there've been a lot of nice comments. And it was a terrific presentation, and I thank you so much for that. Also, thanks to David Landsberger for hosting, and to our captioner Denise Hinksman for filling in so capably for Lauren Schechter tonight. So Gabriela, best of luck with the Chicago and Philadelphia premieres. And for the audience, we continue to see many new faces. To learn more about HLAA, to join or to donate, to help us continue our activities, please go to the chapter website, hearinglossnyc.org. On January 4th at 6 o'clock, we will have our annual Shared Stories meeting. This year's topic will be what we've learned from the pandemic. We hope to hear from many of you, both the bad and the good things that you've learned during the almost 2 years since the onset of the COVID pandemic. So I think we are just about out of time, and I know that Denise has to leave, so I'm going to say goodnight to everyone and best wishes for the holidays to all of you, and hope to see you in January. So thanks again, Gabriela.